Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is Natalia Nakazawa reporting from the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts. This is part of our weekly EFA studio member interviews. So we kind of do a weekly Q&A session with different EFA members. And today we're joined by Noel Anderson, who has been in the building as an artist since when? Noel, when did you get here?
A couple years ago. We just got renewed.
Yeah. And Noel and I have been connecting on multiple levels because we also have sort of shared artistic practices, and we've been having conversations around theory that really inspires us and thinking about sort of like different ways to see the world and like networks and presencing and all these kind of like big topics that really are all understood through the filter of tapestries and textiles, archival imagery, etc. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Noel and say, you know, how did you kind of enter the world of tapestries yourself?
Oh, yes. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Because we had these conversations in the studio and on the phone, but it's nice to like pull it out so people could see, you know?
Yeah.
And a lot of people always ask me, how do I get to the ideas that I have? So this could be a good beginning.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can take notes on this after.
Well, me too. But,
End up in a bio.
So yeah, frankly, it started with my old dealer who passed away, who I still love, Jack Tilton. He used to tell me, you know, you got to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art on Fridays. And I'd be like, well, fuck, Jack, I go all the time. What's a fucking Friday? And he would say, you know, Fridays are great because 10 years ago, it was open late, and usually it was only artists who were there. You can see, I was in my Beyonce moment. I was seeing stars. And I would go watch Richard Tuttle stare at rocks. Seriously.
Yeah.
And I would think, well, he's staring at that thing. Why do I have to stare at the rock? Let me find my own thing at which to stare. So I found myself in the medieval wing, the Great Hall. And it was, at that time, it was me and the attendant. And we sparked up a conversation, and I kept saying to her, I don't know why I'm so mesmerized by these things. And I would come back every week and stare at these tapestries on the wall until I realized I was into it, because I realized, to me, it seemed like the beginning of photography.
Yes.
I didn't know anything other than that. I just assumed.
Right.
Right.
And there's really direct relationships between the digital and photography. I mean, there's so many sort of connective tissues there.
Right. So I did the research, and I started to realize that the guy who invented a specific nuanced way of weaving, Jacquard, during the French Revolution, had developed this method of weaving that was the introduction to binary codes, right? And I was like, oh, well, Charles Babbage then 30 some odd years later picks this binary code method, which is punch card registration, up, and he gives us the grandfather of the computer. I immediately realized every time I'm staring at a tapestry, I'm really just staring at a screen, whether it's film or television. And I started to realize that it allowed me to develop a conversation or extend my conversation about the misrepresentation of Black masculinity in screen culture, right? So all that happened, and it wasn't like fast. It took me a time to put those building blocks together, you know. Been doing this thing for like, at least tapestry weaving, for 11 years.
Yeah, that's
figure out how it works, you know?
Yeah.
And it was good because then it allowed me to understand, by mining the historical scholarship more, it allowed me to understand that, well, if Peter Paul Rubens, right? He makes the cartoon, which is the small painting or something, so that the weavers can then make the bigger weaving, right? But the problem with Peter Paul Rubens is that his paintings are too nuanced. The colors are too subtle. The shifts are too subtle. And the weavers complain. So he says, well, I'll go to the printer, and the printer can take the same image, make it ad infinitum, and I can be making money on both hands. I mean, capitalism 101.
Right.
I realized through that logic that the image, through its iteration, can develop a historical relationship between weaving, painting, print, photography, and sculpture. I mean, frankly, every time you come to my work, I hope that people see all those things in one experience.
Well, I was going to say, it was like, what's interesting is that your background is in printmaking, and it's this idea of like multiples. I mean, there's so many topics that you touch on. It's like, it's capitalism, it's the multiple, it's globalization, which really, you know, anytime that you can make multiples of things, it's like, it's a market is born,
yes.
You know? And so,
it's fucking deep, man. It's about Black labor.
Yep.
The things themselves, because I work with weavers here in the South and in France.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Where are your weavers located? Because I work with weavers in North Carolina. So where?
Oh, mine are not in the Carolinas. I can't
Oh,
tell
no,
you where they
I
are.
was like, I was wondering.
Spies, man. I got spies in my midst. It's cool. No, so, the weavings themselves majority of are made of cotton.
Right, and cotton is like of the whole material history.
It is the ground,
right there. Yeah.
And when they're in the studio, usually I tack them to the wall, and my assistants and we pick those threads, right? So I mean, I'm just sitting in the studio and reiterating Black labor. I'm picking cotton.
Right, you were literally like picking each of the fibers, but you're also distressing them. Like I'm really enjoying, like when I look at your work, I get really excited about where I see just like like different layers of labor too. Like you're painting back onto it. You're like in some cases bleaching it or using other chemical processes, and then you're like tearing things out. You're stapling it.
Yes, let's go there.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I love it. I love and hate to tell the story because it's a little embarrassing, but I'm the youngest of 6 children. And I sat next to my father at the dinner table. And in the 80s, I date myself, we had a TV in the corner that had rabbit ears, And my father was a graduate of MIT in the 50s as a Black man. So, you have no excuses for anything.
Right.
And he was a genius. But when he broke code linguistically, you knew he wasn't playing. So when the TV was on the fritz, the thing was moving, boom, 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 the roll. My father would tap me and say, "Boy, go fix that." And I would say, "Oh, he broke linguistic code. It's important." So I would go over there and play with the rabbit ears and realize that if I had the potential to stabilize the image just by moving these things, that the image itself wasn't stable and as such it couldn't be real. That then got me to realize that the images that I could weave are not real images in their own right. They're not a real experience with the reality of that thing, the experience of that event.
Right.
Right.
But it's an invitation, but then making it into that textile, it's like an invitation to be present with that image.
Right. But
mess with it, alter it, change it.
Yeah, it's weird because once I realized that the image itself wasn't real, and I know that sounds very banal, but it's deep because it allowed me to get over the fear of attacking the thing. So now I could really physically pull it apart and literally, like kind of a Warhol or something, literally look for the thing behind the thing. I was trying to find the origin of the image.
Yeah.
I'll never find it, but it does produce great results, right?
Yeah.
And
but I think it's like maybe the futility or that expression or the like staying with it and just being with all the sort of uncertainty and weirdness that comes with exploring and changing. I don't know. I feel like it does have, a lot of your work has an endurance quality to it. Like you can feel your body, that you can sense that somebody spent time in front of this work and with this work.
My sense is that might come out of my background in performance. When I graduated from grad school, one of the things that, a lot of my colleagues would say was like, well, you make really great performances, but how the hell are you gonna make money off of that? And what they didn't understand was I can make objects and I love 2-dimensional things. So I could figure it out. And I was always trying to figure out a way to survive. And I realized that there has to be a way to make work that alludes to performance without having my specific direct performance involved.
Yeah.
Right. It's all that action painter stuff. Right. And in that way, I mean, I guess some of my work does align itself with action painting. Or historical references in particular, but it's a snag for me because I want people to see the work as beautiful, but I also want them to realize that there's something sinister happening in the world.
Yeah.
Right. These weavings themselves, I mean, let's back up, right? You and I can have this conversation because we're doing it, right?
Right.
Textiles on that level are a class thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've shown tapestries and had that are sort of, images or working with ideas around migration or immigration. And then, having this questioning of the material itself, because the material itself also invokes labor and then like unfair labor practices and then exporting this idea that, you're exporting your labor or whatever. I mean, there's just so many layers to that conversation.
There is, but in terms of like how one can progress that conversation and activate a viewer that implicitly believes they already have a one-up or a higher position in terms of power structures is important. How do you implicate that person? And I think the best way to do it is mathematics. And this gets to the conversation we have about presence. I mean, simply taking the image, right? Because a lot of the works are stretched like paintings right now,
right?
Or a whole conceptual,
right, which kind of like sidesteps the market look, or like the blankets that are just like,
right.
It does kind of sidestep and make maybe a little blurry some of those feelings around mass-produced market, you know, and then it sidesteps back into like the painting language.
Right, but it also gets us to have a conversation about access and the democratization of materials.
It does, yeah.
Right? I mean, nothing for nothing, Warhol was a son of a bitch, but when he's, you know, when he takes that Marxist stance of seizing the means of production, I don't really believe he wanted to go in that territory, but he does give us a clue on the ways in which to defeat the conditions in which we live.
Right.
Right. But for me, let's back up, right? The presence that we were talking about for the audience, I'll say you and I were having this conversation about what it means to be demanding for us to be there, or for a black body or a brown body to be present, so that a white audience can devour that body, and so on and so forth, right?
The body snatching that happens with that.
Yes, and that requires that we give that white viewer access. And what I'm advocating through mathematics, we can deny that access. Because when I take the tapestry, pull it off the stretcher, and let it drape like a Sam Gilliam, they can't see the whole thing.
Right.
That's when the mathematics gets interesting. Let's go there, right? Because mathematics is not about 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s. It's about systems in which people are ordered or organized and structured, right?
Right, and what we talked is like the literal buying and selling of bodies, and the sort of mechanizations that allow, you know, for this one power to come in and say, I can see everything in one glance. Here is the roster of all the people I own and how much they are. So, and we were talking about the sort of transparency and misogyny and power that's included in these type of mathematic exchanges, you know, the little capitalistic model that we're in.
Right.
And so how to subvert that, not even subvert that, but how to just even be on a different plane.
Right. But let's start from the ground up. Let's give a very basic example. A very basic example of what we were actually talking about. You can see it in someone like a Catherine McKittrick, who is a genius, and Sylvia Winter, and Torquasi Dyson, who's riffing off of that, and Fred Moten. But you can see it if we think about slave ledger, right? Or census.
Right, census, yeah.
Census is nothing but a grid that tries to locate you in white patriarchal space.
However, the census is also what gives funding, and we need people to sign.
Right. This is true, and it's not a bad thing, because we all live in this kind of grid.
Right.
But the census, or much like a slave ledger, it is a grid to calculate your property, or a grid to calculate objects.
Right. And there needs to be a reckoning with the fact that this is the way that this is the way that things are distributed, and this is the world that we're existing in. It operates on this.
Right. And the logic of that patriarchy, I guess we'll just say it, or that system, is that it can see everything, it is all knowing.
Yeah.
But the reality is that's not true.
Right.
Because if it could see everything, it would know that there are people in, I don't know, sub-Saharan Africa who are building pots that no one's ever seen before. I'm not saying this is happening. I'm just saying that they can't see everything.
No, obviously, but it's like, it's the type of valuing. It's like, that is the visible system that makes for basically, you know, any white person could come in and say, this is the dictate, and it happens.
Yes, but I would argue that when we pull the works off the wall, because these things are woven, we must tell them that it's woven, not printed. When we pull them off the wall and let them drape, right? It reduces the availability that the viewer has.
Yeah.
It also approaches another kind of mathematics that undercuts the logic of a white patriarchal Euclidean mathematics. It's a different, it's I would call it non-Euclidean or n-dimensional.
Right. And this is what we were talking about, like the types of maths that dictate fractal math, or the types of maths that dictate sort of quantum or other dimensions, or what we talked about, sort of POC time, which is like you're a body in space, but when you're walking down the street, people see you in a different country, they see you in a different place. So it's like you have racial geographies placed on top of you. And
Yeah.
so like, you know, anybody who's walking down the street has to, you are contending with all these histories that you're not in control of, you know.
And they're all mathematical because they're all structures of knowledge. They're ways of organizing. And my argument is that if we could find counter mathematical structures,
and
use them to undercut the Euclidean or patriarchal mathematics that is organizing us now. We're actually seeing it in real time. We just don't realize we're seeing it. I think hip hop was a great example. It was kind of like subcultures are really great because they're not.
I mean, jazz literally. I mean, it changed completely how, you know, what people understood as a sequence of sounds that made sense, that were visible.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, the work, we could talk about like the racial complexities of the work, which I talk about ad infinitum, but I love this conversation about bringing in scientific and mathematical knowledge to, and I'm not just talking about a kind of Eurocentric, right? Because, I mean, you know, if I could stare at like a Persian rug or something, we're staring at mathematics ad infinitum, that kind of algebra that undercuts a kind of belief in a Greek algebra is genius. Right? I mean, it's in your work, isn't it?
How it's like, what's that?
Isn't that in your work? These kinds of that form of knowledge making or structure, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's this idea of like also storytelling. So using this sort of, people think about mathematical space as being like the antithesis of a narrative or storytelling. And I'm like, if you look at a Persian rug, or you look at any of the sort of knowledge that's embedded in Peruvian or in any, indigenous of any kind, you know, textiles are used for communication and storytelling. There's spaces for vehicles of knowledge, like you can sing songs. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that people were able to pass down knowledge that were pre-alphabet, you know, in some cases. And I mean, it's such a place of knowledge, and knowledge can look like lots of different things. It doesn't have to look like what we're used to seeing ones and zeros and text, everything being text-based. Like, for instance, the internet is like the internet space, it's English only. So it's like, you know, you have websites in all kinds of languages, and yet it's English only. That's how Google is like, you know, tagging things. And so it's all text-based and it's all number-based. And it's, you know, when you realize what is missing in the way that we're able to navigate our own knowledge, the body is missing.
It is, but that all comes from like cybernetics and chaos theory, and war. And I think what you and I, to be honest, I think what you or I are trying to do is put the human back in math.
Yes.
It is a compassionate knowledge system that tries to account for the idiosyncrasies of being a human being.
Right. And then we talked about how things like, you know, looking back at, you know, just using things in your like natural dyes, or like working with, like, I'm just thinking about plants and things that have some kind of knowledge in them, you know, that can be a lot of sort of a good place to start, or
let's talk about, because we're talking about pops. I love that, and there's something else that I think is aligned with or accompanies the conversation about a white patriarchal structure of knowledge, which I think we could say someone like a Philip Harper in his abstractionist aesthetics talks about with Benjamin Franklin. That's good, but the idea of that kind of grid that is a white male grid, it doesn't account for things that it doesn't see or doesn't exist within its terms, right? And I think that those things, those hidden figures, if you will, are actually not just the figures, the people themselves, but the forms and the objects that those people use, which is why I think it's important that you and I use textile, because textile itself is often reduced to craft, and it becomes a bastard kind of term. But then I'm like, well, what happens when you take this bastard term, which I don't think craft is a bastard term at all. There are a whole lot of people in our world who say they can make some shit. They can't make a motherfucking thing.
They can't make anything.
Not a thing. I love my students, but a lot of my students leave the university and they can't make a fucking thing. But I keep trying to tell people, I'm like, but that's what's so good about textile. Is that nobody and like high art or mainstream really, not really, wants to deal with what it is. Right?
Well, I think it's because you can't, if you don't divest the concept from the material, if the material and the concept are merged together, you can't market it. It's like not as saleable or something.
But you could say that, but we could undercut that argument by saying if you just tie it to its historical significance, textiles were they have been the one common currency that has sustained capitalism.
That's true.
So in my mind, textiles seem to be far more significant globally than a fucking painting.
No, that's absolutely true.
Right? And you and I are on that space where like nobody sees how important this is. Let's take it.
It's absolutely.
Take it for as long as we can take it and try to move it into that mainstream conversation that we need to be having. You dig?
I mean, I oftentimes use the example of the chintz because chintzes were originally actually a beautifully complex craft in India where it was it was all natural dyes and then fermentation. It was actually a fermentation process to get the sort of, reds and whites and yellows and whatever of the chintz. But then it's like the European market took it over because they wanted to make fancy bedspreads and wall hangings. And then they started reproducing it at such a rate that chintz actually became a term like, oh, this is chintzy, it feels cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So the translation of something that was like an incredibly rich,
right, but that's important because that gets.
But then it became a currency, and currency like a fiat currency. It became like a fiat currency, where it's just like there's no gold on it. We're just printing cash.
Yeah, but that's a really significant gesture.
Yeah.
Because
so how do you resist that fiat? How do you resist that desire to just print currency? And what we're saying is that you have to fight that with the body. You have to fight that with compassion and maybe some of what we were talking about which is about consciousness.
Yeah, you know what? I think my recent answer for all those questions is that I recognize myself as a historical being. For when I say that, what it means is I understand that I come from something. And I can always go to that something, whether it's 20 years ago or 400 years ago or even before, and find models of resistance or success and bring them to my contemporary situation. And I might have to shift them and rework them and make them malleable again. I'll reform them. But whatever I find in that archive, it's going to be my answer. You understand? And I bring that to the territory because what we need to understand, I think, is that if we are not historical beings, we will not see the divestation of chintz as significant. We will just say, oh, well, someone did it, it is what it is. But to be a historical human being to me means you understand that there was a series of relationships that were built around that aesthetic, that form. There were rituals and ceremonies, right? There were birthing rituals, right? All those things are embedded in this weaving. Painting doesn't do that. Right.
And this is, okay, so this is going back to the document that we put together, but...
I'm sorry, I should say, a certain kind of painting doesn't do that. I'm so sorry.
It's true. It's true. And I do agree, but that's what I'm saying. I think painting in some ways it's kind of like even Warhol, the whole point of it was that it becomes a concept and it becomes completely divested from the material world, which is exactly the antithesis, as much as I'm like, thanks, Pop, thank you, Andy, for certain of your thoughts. But what we're actually, and again, goes back to some of the intentions that we outlined. But one of the things that we said was making sure that speculative spaces do not get unhinged from the stakes of the material world.
Yes.
Always considering labor and real conditions, grounding things in space and in the moment through bodily activations, and somehow taking things out of the purely theoretical realm and into the practiced hand. Mm-hmm. So some of that, and then we were talking about toppling monuments as a means to, and destruction in general as a means to achieve what it is to just be in your body. you know?
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe it's like a like metabolizing.
Yeah, that's another Marxist.
Yeah.
I mean, there's I mean, it's oh, that's the snag. I like this conversation. That's a fucking snag. Okay. Ah, but see, I have a problem. I have a problem now.
Okay, what's your problem?
My snag is ah. Actually, can you repeat the last thing you said?
Okay, I said, all right, so
what was before monuments? Because I'm going somewhere. Let's go somewhere.
Okay, so grounding things in space and in the moment through bodily activations and somehow taking things out of the purely theoretical realm and into the practiced hand.
Yes, but that's right. That's the movement from concept to praxis, right? Theoretical is nice and that's cute and that's in your head, but what are we gonna do to change our condition, right?
Well, that's what it's saying. But that's the call of activism, and I think that what we're trying to say is that textiles, there's an activation, there's like a presencing, like even if you are hanging it on the wall, if you drape, even just the act of draping it, there's an implied body there. There's like this idea that you know, it could wrap around you, it could protect you,
right.
And it could, you know, it could be a banner, it could signify something, it could be, you know, a disruption or a rallying too.
Yeah, it can, but my sense is that I would prefer an artist to be very conscious about what that looks like, and really allow that to creep into their work. Slowly, possibly, but once you recognize it's there, deal with it. Because since there are a lot of artists who are just, I'm gonna use a Southern phrase, which is something like, a lot of artists are just throwing signifiers all around all willy-nilly, you know?
Exactly, and I think that that's like one of the issues, because people are not willing to take a risk into the unknown. They're not willing to take actually a risk to take the concept into a practiced hand because they don't trust themselves and they don't trust others.
Yeah, but okay, so then I would go back to my archive, right? My allies, right? And my allies tell me, I'm in the Hobbit. The Hortense tell me. My allies tell me, and my allies are Thelonious Monk, Coltrane, Ornette Coleman, the ones who broke jazz. They tell me, Monk would say, reach for something.
Right.
I don't want to go to the studio and see the same stuff. That's boring.
Yeah.
I feel sorry, and I'm sure they're making a lot more money than me, but I feel sorry for artists who feel like they need to make the same thing out of night. That's boring.
I feel terrible for them because that's like where life is like in those uncertain moments and trying something, you know, trying to get this into this. Or
right, but that's a part of my studio.
Or vice versa.
But that's a part of the studio. Like I make things, and I get to a point where like I get to a point when I'm making it, I say I'm really engaged in this object. I have to stop working on it. I'll leave. I'll come back sooner or later, and I want to see it in a new.
Yeah.
Right? I'm serious, and I tell my students the same thing. I want to walk into my studio and see something I've never seen before, and I want it every day. Yeah. And it's hard, right? But textiles give me that because I don't see textiles every day unless you're talking about my studio, at which point you'll see it every day.
No, and that's part of our overly commercialized, you know, world. Like this sort of, I mean, you know, this is like a New York City maybe problem too, because I'm sure people in different places get to see dirt more often. They can see trees more often. They get to, like, see textiles more often. So maybe that's like, you know, maybe our problem too. But
let's circle back, because I think we're missing. I think people need to hear this. I think people are missing the shift. It's not everybody's missing, but I think people are missing it. I think you and I are advocating for the same thing. I will say it again. There are models of success and resistance that exist before us. Yeah. And we can find them and stop thinking that the structure is right when it tells you don't worry about that thing.
Right.
Don't look at that, right? Because really what they're telling you is that they recognize that that thing has value, but they don't want you to see its value. Because if you see its value, you'll spend all your life unlocking that. And if you can, by chance, unlock it, they are in trouble.
They're in trouble, I know.
You know?
Yeah.
You know? But I also think that this conversation about mathematics and fractals is significant. Because there's a colleague of mine, he's a dear friend, he's like a brother of mine. He just wrote this book with another colleague about Baudrillard. And they're rereading Baudrillard and they're trying to read the fractal through Baudrillard, and they're doing a really brilliant job, because simulation and simulacrum, which we all are supposed to read in art school, is all about fractals. It really is.
Oh,
it's about developing a structure, and then letting that structure superimpose itself on a bunch of other things and build a network of the same structure. But the idea that the fractal will build that one structure that you thought it was going to build is bullshit. The way the fractal works now, I think they're calling it fractal realities, and Donald Trump is a really good example of it, because he's doing what's called gish gash. The way the fractal or gish gash works is that you build a series of illusions or lies, and you throw them out ad infinitum, and they all look the same, but you never know which one is the real one. That's the dark side of fractals. What you and I are talking about is a brighter side to fractals. How can fractals be used to develop networks of communication? How can mathematics, by which I mean fractals, be used to develop social relationships, right?
But I think
that are fluid and not linear. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right, no, but I'm saying that I think what you're talking about is actually the relationship of, like, you know, mentors and students, or, like, you know, I mean, the relationships of, you know, one-on-one sort of intimacies, but structured ones that unlock potential of, like, care.
Yes.
Again, that's the whole, you know.
Yo, I just realized it. You and I are on it. Yes. So that's what it is. Listen. Listen, this, you in my studio. We in the studio now. Okay. Listen. Okay, let me just go through my mind. Because we have fractals, this. Okay. This is the same thing we were just talking about. The white patriarchal grid cannot move that way. A fractal grid can.
Yeah.
It can move like James Brown. Yeah. It can accommodate for the days you don't want to do some shit.
Right.
The grid won't. The grid says you either wake up or you don't exist.
Right.
Our fractal grid, I'm just calling it fractal grid now. In an essay I wrote for a friend, I call it the malleable grid or the Black maternal mathematical grid. It doesn't matter. Cool. It's a grid that is relative to Black and brown people.
It's like the grid of textiles, where it's like,
it can move.
It can
malleable, right? It's like grandma. It's like grandma's hands.
Right.
Okay, baby, you don't feel well. Well, I'm gonna move over here and just hug you for a second. You know, I'm gonna move over here and just bring. The grid doesn't do that, right? And I'm really happy that I think you and I have identified textiles as that mathematical format.
Yeah, and I think, like, that's like when I realized that I could make my work something that could be touched and felt and, like, literally wrapped and have different types of movement. You know, coming from a painting background, I'd always worked with canvas. Mm-hmm. But again, canvas is somewhat, it's starched, it's just like, you know, might as well be, you know, a block or something.
It's a board.
It might as well be a board. And I think that there was something that really changed in me, and that was so much, it had such a better resonance when I started working with textiles, that I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense for me. You know?
Yeah, I think, you know, let me write this down. Working with the textile more elastic. Yes, I like that word, elastic. Yes. So the warp and the weft of a textile, of the ones we work with, allows for the thing to be more elastic. And maybe the grid that is associated with that is the one that we've tapped into. We just don't know yet.
Yeah.
You know, I think can we talk about presence, please?
Yeah, and also I did want to ask you specifically to talk about the project you're working on now and the sort of body of research.
Oh, sure.
You're working on right now, and, like, how that maybe relates to.
Sure. Well, let me just make a point about presence, because I think it's really necessary for our work. Mm-hmm. It's for everybody, right? What you and I do is not printed.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's important,
because a lot of people see it on screen and they're like, oh, that's just printed on some kind of fabric,
like
an Albert Olin painting, and it's stretched. No. The textile is woven. The image is woven. If I move one thread, the image dissolves. It's not the same thing.
Right. Yeah.
As such, the image is the ground. Because the image is the ground, and the images that we use to define ourselves are not real, or I think are a little limited in their experience, or their definition of experience, right? Then the ground in which we defined ourselves is not stable.
Right.
I'm advocating for
It's interconnected. Like if you take one thing out, it ultimately
right,
changes it.
right, and that's the first part. And the other part is when you see our work, and I'm going to say when you see our work online, understand because it's woven, it's not flat. It is a dimensional experience, which requires the viewer to be present.
Right.
Right. Y'all need to show up because when people are like, "Oh, well, I've seen it. It's great." I'm like, "You got to see it in person."
Yeah, you have to see it in person, and I think that is that because it rides that sort of like ambiguous. I think it's just ambiguous to people because again, we're used to seeing either two-dimensional, strictly two-dimensional, flat graphic, you know, just paintings, or we're like sculpture and it's like an install shot. And textiles, again, like everything, it's blends so many things. It's like it rides that line of ambiguity.
That's what Duchamp calls the infra thin. And Duchamp gets us to n-dimensional geometry, which is basically what you were talking about before, about a higher perspective so we can see what we're doing. But you don't want me to go there. That can get real weird. But what was your other question? I'm sorry, you said
like the body of research that you're doing right now around the sort of medical equipment.
Right. So yeah. Well, because I'm interested in how colonizers use mathematics to organize POC. Because I'm really interested in that, what colonization in mathematics really means. I'm simply looking through a bunch of very dated books from our forefathers to figure out how they use mathematics to organize slave populations. So when we look at like Thomas Jefferson's farm book, we can find his the blueprints of his tools that he built so that the slaves could produce cotton or whatever they were, produce product or agriculture at a level that could keep up with the growing or the intensive nature of capitalism at the time, right?
Right.
So
I always have to remember these are things that were inventions. And people think that capitalism is like it's like a guarantee, or that all these systems are just guarantees. And I'm like, these are all, when you really take a moment to pause and say, these were all inventions. We can also invent ourselves. I mean, they're inventions, contend with it like that.
Right, but those inventions were used to really suture black bodies to earth.
Yeah,
absolutely. Right. It was this tool that was used, this plow that one of these plows that he made or invented was used to suture the black body to its own labor. Right. And I want to use those mathematical forms, right? The parabola or the edge or the shape of the blade that was used to build canvases that do the same thing.
Right.
Right. So I mean, I've been dealing with it for years, but I've just now finally decided to try to show the works, because I've been making these kind of shaped canvases for years. So I'm making these shaped canvases that use Jefferson and other colonial fathers' blueprints for tools to structure a discourse about Black representation. You dig?
Right. Yes.
And the idea really is that that system is, as an institution, never left us.
Right.
Right. Thomas Jefferson's plow is as much relevant now as it was in 1802.
Yeah, and I think making visible, or like just looking at those actual angles, curves, it's like you have to sit with it and you have to look at that and be with it.
Right, and it allows you also to have a model against which to measure another mode of knowledge. Right, so I mean, something as simple as imagine in a show, one tapestry I make is stretched and another tapestry is draped. Well, there are two forms of mathematics in one space. Right. And what do both of those structures of knowledge offer the viewer? Right. Is a question that I'm really interested in. I don't have any questions or answers, but it's a question that I'm really interested in. Right. Absolutely. I think, now, so I guess I have a couple of shows coming up, God willing, COVID. One in LA at what is it, UTA? They want to show one of my larger tapestries. It's, I think, 30 by 30 of footage from the LA riots or revolution during the 92 LA riots of three cops detaining or really arresting three Black civilians, two of them, and they're all pushing them on the hood of the car. The two figures to the left and the right are males, and there's a figure of a woman in the middle, and she's kind of groaning and screaming in the image. I mean, the idea, again, is that this structure of oppression came before us. It's just institutional, which means it will sustain itself unless we break it. My hope is that I can use something as so seductive and subtle and stereotypically feminine as textiles to seduce the audience to really reconsider how Black and brown bodies are regulated.
Right. But I think that, you know, that stuff, I know you really dive into the masculinity, but it's like, really it's about breaking this binary and thinking about the body in as much as it's retelling or revisiting the horrors that we've taken along with us this whole time. It's also what we were talking about, like thinking about bodies in flux, or maybe even the future of what a body could look like, or what an emancipated body or abolitionist, like what sort of like, what are the futures if like sort of, maybe my overall thinking is like, if Thomas Jefferson's plow is on this side, like what could potentially, like what structures are on the other side? And I guess some of those answers are maybe,
I don't know. I think the structure that echoes or owes its lineage to Jefferson would be like gerrymandering, sorry. Government housing.
I mean, some of those, those maps are insane.
Yeah, but that's the same mathematics that was used to develop that little plow, right?
Yeah.
You know, there was an exhibition I did in 2017 at the gallery that I show in Luxembourg, Zedum Boussiet. I love them, and they want him, and the Europeans, frankly, are allowing me to do more charged work, and they're accepting more of my theoretical ideas.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, like, I think that's a really relevant conversation to have about the inability of American institutions to have intelligent conversations, or just even just encourage radical thinking, because we're so.
Yeah, but let's go there, right? Okay, so let's go there. So in the show, I did a show called Get Lifted, right? And it was based, frankly, off of a book I read that was called 100 Years of Lynching, and it's essentially an anthology of little reports written by journalists from 1865 to around 1970 about the lynchings of Black bodies and what it was like to be at this lynching. And it's just, you know, reportage. It's reporting, right? And when I read it, I realized the terms that they were using through these events were the same terms we use to describe basketball, contemporary basketball. There's a mob, there's a crowd, they both go wild, the body is suspended, it sways, it suspends off of the iron. There are all these terms we talk about. I was like, oh, okay. And then I realized the structure that's the structure.
So
it's literally been embedded into the NBA. It really has. It's a way of organizing the Black body, and to believe that LeBron James is really free. He has money, and that is true. But I'm not sure he's really free if in the end game, he can still be shot in the street and reduced to an object. Yeah. And that was a part of it, right?
Yeah.
So then I realized I went to there was the opening, and we talked, everybody at the show, we talked about my interest in Derrida. And we talked about my complexity with Heidegger, and a slew of other people, and Douglas, and all these people. And I realized, oh, even at the opening, they're willing to go to this territory with me. I think American audiences need to be willing to go to that territory. And it doesn't mean everybody's not willing, because people are willing.
Yeah.
But to really sit down and have a conversation about the complexities of POC art that transcends a conversation about, well, how is this about being Black?
Yes.
Right?
It's because it's about our system. If we're going to decolonize one person's mind, you can't just decolonize this person and not decolonize. I mean, you have to do, it has to be a conversation that actually transcends also industry, or like, we can't just be having this siloed conversation over here. I mean, it has to be a conversation that's you know, like a fractal, like two people are having this conversation, two more people have this conversation, two more people have this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And one would hope that we would be able to bring some clarity around why we're here right now. It's not a mystery.
Yeah, to be honest, I think there are a lot of artists who are POC who are really who can frankly give a shit about the work always being about race and identity, and say, you know, there are other complex identity, or there are other complex ideas that I can suture or graft to my identity investigation that would really break it open. I mean, frankly, I'm gonna be honest, I am into the new Star Trek, and Michael Burnham is blowing my mind right now. First of all, can we talk about the fact, can we talk about the fact that the lead role is a Black woman with a stereotypical male name, probably white male name, and she saves the day every episode. I was having a conversation with one of my family members over the weekend, and I was like, and this is Afrofuturism, right? I was like, of course, in science fiction space, that's the only space that the white patriarchy will let us realize that possibility, right? But then Obama comes and he threw that into a loophole.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm wondering now, was Obama the ushering in of a science fiction world? Because COVID is making me feel like this shit is sci-fi, y'all.
Yes.
With Alice in the Looking Glass, up is down and down is up.
Yep. I mean,
right? I think that a lot of that is in the work, whether people realize it or not. You know, I think a lot of the implicit arguments and the concerns that we've been working out today are in the work. There's a lot there. You know, like a Derridian essay. I hope people come back more than once, because there's a complex narrative.
I know. We've been talking for like, you know, something like 40 minutes or something like that. But
I'm sorry, 2 minutes.
No. I love it.
There's a lot.
I just told you I would check in and let you know when we're like, you know, at a certain time. But we can.
Well, it's up to you. I mean, I could talk for another. We're at 6:48. You want to do another 12 minutes?
Yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah, because hopefully people will be like, he was so good. Your conversation was so great. Let's bring him back. Fuck.
I mean, I love this conversation. What I like about this conversation is actually unfolding. Like, we're not just hashing things. Like, we're like discovering things along the way, which is really.
That's what I like. This is dialogic.
Yes, this is dialogic.
This is really dialogic, right? Okay, so let's break that down.
We can talk about the readings that we, you know.
Right. So you and I'm just gonna say, you and I have realized a while ago that we have similar ideas, and we have one form that is very similar, which is the textile, right?
Right.
And we realized through our ideas that a lot of them are united. The imagery is not the same, but there's a lot of core themes that you and I are trying to work through, right? And we're collaborating now, hopefully on this show that we can pitch. Yes. We are. It's happening. Where we're thinking about mathematics, fractals, consciousness, Bakhtin, through the lens of, at least in the form of the textile, and the lens of colonialism, where are we now, so on and so forth, right?
Right.
Very important. Okay. And the other day we were talking about fractals.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So we started with fractal. Well, actually, we didn't. I'm sorry. Let's go back. Sorry. We started with Bakhtin.
Yeah, we started with Bakhtin, but actually we started with hydrias too, and then also this sort of multi-locational storytelling.
Okay. That's good.
That's true too.
Right? Because I was like, well, who is a theorist that is your fucking jam? Who gets you going? And you were like, Bakhtin is my ground. And I was like, I love Bakhtin, but I don't know the dialogic. So I read it, right? What is the name of the essay?
It's heteroglossia, which is in the theory of the novel. But it's really just that. I mean, it's like, I'm not Bakhtin everywhere, but like this particular thing helped me to understand myself as a whole human, because I talk about identity politics. Like, identity can be used as a weapon. It can be weaponized to say you're not enough of this, you're not enough of that, and none of you don't make sense as a person. Like, what's your Japanese part? Where's your Latin American part? It can be used as almost an internal divisive mechanism to destroy you.
Yeah, but
what helped me by reading this is understanding myself as a whole human, and understanding that we can have all these, sort of voices and sort of multi-locational storytelling happening within one framework, and it represents a whole novel, a whole story.
Yeah, but what that really means in my
consciousness.
But no, it's not the consciousness. What you said was important, but I'm just trying to like boil it down because I'm not that smart. I'm trying to understand, And the way I understand that is something like people of color are not singular beings. And what the patriarchal grid, if we could circle it back, right? What the patriarchal grid is tries to reduce you to a single being so that it can know you.
It can know you. Exactly.
There you go, right?
And that ambiguity, there's nothing more infuriating than being born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and having people say, where are you from? Constantly interrogate your location from morning till night and just basically accuse you of not knowing yourself, not being of yourself, it's gaslighting. It's like you don't know yourself, you don't know anything about you. I know something because I'm a white person, and I look at you and I know more than you do. Somehow.
Okay. Let's go back because you had something there. The fucker, you had something. Okay, so there was fractal, dialogic, heteroglossal. Oh, we are not single beings. Okay. Moten tells us that we are not single beings. Okay. And the necessity of understanding that is so that, in my opinion, people of color do not allow themselves to get reduced to those kind of stereotypes and sometimes archetypes that are limited and made available for us. Right. Which is why I love Pose.
Yeah.
Right? Because it immediately advocates that there is another structure that says I'm supposed to be this. Well, I've developed another structure that might be a little bit smaller and not visible, but it moves in a different way that yours does not. Right. But it's deeper than that, right? It's deeper than that, right? There's the term dialogic that they don't want me to tell you. They're starting to get me.
You need some more coffee.
Water. So there's the term dialogic that I was like, what? And then once I reread Bakhtin a few times, I was like, oh, that's what he's talking about. Right. The way I understand it. He would position it against the dialectic, which is Hegelian. And that dialogic is not academic, really. It's about two consciousnesses. It's about multiple consciousnesses trying to understand each other on real time.
Yeah, and what you texted me something, and I really, really liked what you said, which is basically, okay, so you said the connections of consciousness that are implied through him is really significant. We have to gain access to someone else's consciousness and give up access to our own is important. There's an empathic level that we got to get through. So I think like the sort of empathic level where you have to, when you're meeting, when you're trying to find out who somebody is, as opposed to you imposing something, it's like you're actually asking that and then letting that consciousness arise. And then you're putting yourself back a little bit to like.
I'm sure that there's like some amazing religious space or spiritual space, but that's it.
Yeah.
You have to turn that. You have to like get rid of the ego. It's like the
monkey. Yeah, but I think that's another thing. So it's like the presence and the empathic nature of. I mean, in some ways, what we're trying to reach towards is out of this sort of the all-knowing grid and go into the unknowing confluence of like connected consciousness.
Yes, and that requires people to be fucking vulnerable. And that's scary. It's scary to be like, I'm just going to give myself to somebody. That's called love. Fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. My sense is now, I just want to make a bunch of textiles that are about love.
Oh.
Not sentimental, you bastard.
No.
God, but in a conceptual way, no. I mean, I think it's really important for us to realize now that we've had this exorcism, that there is for us an implicit relationship between empathy and textile.
Empathy, and everybody care.
Yes, but care. Care and empathy. I always feel it's very similar, right?
It's like somehow that you're like acknowledging,
right. Huey Copeland talks about attending towards care for Black people. I like that. It is a care. It's a care. Yeah. It's a compassion, and it sounds hokey dokey, but I feel like that's the way. And I feel like textiles get us there because they're all about care. They're about what does it mean to dress your body? What are the signifiers you put on yourself so people identify who you think you are and not who they think you are? It's about mending. Fabric can tear. You can stitch it back up and put it back together, right? There are a whole lot of folks in this lifetime, I think, in the States, right, who can't afford certain new clothing, so they have to care for the textiles that they have around them, right? Being the youngest of 6, I got a bunch of hand-me-downs.
Yeah, of course, I would imagine.
And there's that relationship between care, empathy, and textiles that I think that you and I are slowly trying to work out. And the rub, frankly, the challenge is, how do we do that? Which really means, how do we present a humanistic lens? How do we develop a humanistic lens using mathematics and mechanical and technological tools? How do we put the human back into technology?
Right. Well, and it's like a kind of an unknown and tricky line, because like even unpacking, like, you know, we're working through, in your case, a lot of, you know, very violent and toxic imagery. In some ways, it's just like taking it back and being able to like process it in a different way, you know, but also I think that there has to be some acknowledgement too that, you know, it's like we're like in the material. You can't ignore the labor, like you can't ignore everything. So it's like we're just in kind of an ambiguous space somehow, I think, still.
Yeah, I think so. But whose labor gets ignored? That's my question. Whose labor?
Well, I'm just saying, like, we're not making everything by hand ourselves.
There we go. Right. No, you're right. And that is one of the snags, and I think a necessary snag.
I think it puts it in conversation with a different, like, globalization. It's like you're having a different conversation than if this was all handmade exactly by one person.
Yeah, those are the stakes.
Right.
Those are the stakes, and I think really what we're talking about, because we are talking about a colonialist lens, we have to be talking about the Industrial Revolution and the things that we are using emerged out of the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly.
That's what it is.
You know, exactly. And I think I think it's fine to continue to acknowledge some of these systems, you know, and just say that this is it's, you know, almost it's part of the work too.
It is. It really is.
It brings up a different discussion.
It really is. And beyond me wanting to go to the studio and see something new, I want to go to the studio every day and be implicated.
Right.
I want to be confused. Like, should I show this? Have I wronged the ancestors? When I die and go to the other side, because I'm dying and going to the other side. Not too soon. I won't leave you yet. But when I die and go to the other side, I want them to say to me, "Man, you did what you were supposed to do. You've done yours."